Hey everyone, welcome back to the Strategic UTXO. My name is Matt, and in this video, we're going to take a look at Bitcoin and see why we could be headed lower before we ultimately can put in a new all-time high above $123,000. We've already dipped to 114,750, and we're going to take a look at why I think we could potentially, there's a chance that we go just slightly lower before having the fuel to then make a move to the upside. As we know, Bitcoin likes to move lower after periods of consolidation before it can put in a new all-time high. Other things we're going to cover in this video is futures liquidations, the CME gap, and one of my concerns that I have regarding Bitcoin's ability to continue to move higher, which is the Bitcoin Treasury company bear market that we're currently seeing. So if we have a very generic view here at the Bitcoin chart on the daily, we can see that we put in a new all-time high of $123,000 and $231.07 here on Monday, July 14th. So generally, for the past 10 days, we've just been chopping around with actually very low volatility. If we put in the volume, if I pull up the 4-hour chart and pull up the volume, you can see that the only real volume spikes that we've had are our two dips below $116,000. We had it back on the 15th, and then we also had it last night and during the day today when we dipped down to 114,000. Now, it was kind of filling in this gap that we left from liquidating all the shorts. In here, this has been a fair value gap as well as a CME Futures Gap and an on-chain gap where there were very few coins that traded hands in this area. So it's good that we've backfilled it twice with relatively high volume, which both of these situations were when we just watched out futures traders. But before we look at the futures liquidations chart, make sure to check out my newsletter, also called the Strategic UTXO. When you sign up for the newsletter, you get deeper insights into Bitcoin and macro, and I also post one longer premium video with each newsletter, and the link to that is in the description below. But if we look at this dip down to below 115,000, which by the way was incredibly healthy, I was about to record this video last night as we were dipping from 117 to 116, and then we were just about to go below 115, and then I had some computer issues. But here we are finally recording the aftermath of what happened. We look at the futures liquidation and blow out to the 2-week time frame, which usually gives us a little bit more information than the default 3-day. You can see that there were a lot of liquidations that took place in Bitcoin and also in broader crypto early this morning and late last night. If I pull up the 24-hour rect chart, you can see that over $385 million in long perpetual futures were liquidated. If you look at the areas that have yellow or white colors, these are the regions where there are a lot of estimated liquidations when it comes to perpetual futures. If you look on the top side, you see that there's a lot of liquidations in the $121,000 to $122,000 level. These levels have been defended so far. Right when we get up to over 120,000, there's a lot of selling pressure, and the same thing when we've gotten below 116, 115.5 or so in that range, there's been also a lot of buying pressure. And so we've had low volatility and actually relatively low volume in this area. As you can see here, we've just been chopping sideways. One of the areas that I was hoping that we were going to wick down to was below 114,000. Buyers did step into the market, and so we only liquidated this little pocket here. We could definitely see lower, and we're going to take a look at that in a moment. But if we look at the high side, we can see that if we go higher than 121 or higher than 122, this is the fuel that could catapult us up to a new all-time high at 124,000, 125,000, and basically put us in a new range, because Bitcoin has loved to just have these moments where it impulses up and then it just chops sideways. It's been doing this basically since the bottom at the end of 2022. And unfortunately, the market has not changed in any way that could indicate that this pattern will change. With a much more mature futures and options market, along with different rebalancing schedules from large institutions that are purchasing the Bitcoin ETFs, I think it's going to be stair-stepping to the right for the foreseeable future. I also do not think that we're going to hit $200,000 by the end of the year, although that is technically possible. We'll look at those situations in future videos. It looks like the market just wants to go up and to the right and consolidate, then wick down to clear a bunch of traders, and before it makes its move to new all-time highs. Now, if you've been on X today, you've seen that the reason why a lot of people think that this dip happened last night is due to a large whale selling that had 80,000 Bitcoin from back in early 2011 that they transferred to Galaxy, and they were doing just basically VWAP sales, and that's where this low spike in volume came from. I'm not entirely convinced that this is exactly what happened, but we have seen indications that this investor did sell a lot of Bitcoin using the Galaxy Digital OTC desk, and this is one of the reasons why we've kind of been selling. It seems selling pressure around 120,000. And then also this dip here down to 114. So the good news is that if this is true, if the reports that are coming out are true, and this investor sold 70,000 Bitcoin with 10,000 left in the last 2 weeks or so. The fact that we've only dropped from basically 120, 123 down to 115, 114K is really remarkable. The strength in Bitcoin and the size of both Strategy, the other Bitcoin Treasury companies, and these ETFs coming in and gobbling up these coins at lower levels is actually pretty remarkable. So that's incredibly good to see. Now, the one concern, I guess I have two, but we'll start with my first concern that I have for Bitcoin is the futures chart. You can see that when we went to new all-time highs and we basically punched straight through 114K all the way to 123K just 2 days later, we left a very large CME gap here at about 114.5 to 115.5 here. Now, this is on the futures chart. So there is generally a premium on the CME futures Bitcoin price. And so in order to fill this gap, the price probably needs to go even lower. If you assume a $500 to $800 premium on the futures price compared to spot. This is really the only gap we have in the market in recent memory. If we do go back to late April, we did have another futures gap open up when we gapped up from a Tuesday to a Wednesday. This was during the 1 hour break that the CME futures has during the week. But you can see this, and a lot of people are still waiting for this to be filled. However, you can see if I pull out a basic trend line that these CME gaps don't need to technically be fully filled, but this fill the next day on Thursday is a technical fill on this chart. So when it comes to recent memory for the CME futures chart, the last gap that we have is only sitting here at 115.5. So I'm actually a little bummed that we only went down to, if I pull the low here on the futures, what do we get? 115.600. If we would have gone basically like $100 lower, we could have marked this gap as technically filled. If we went down $1,000, it basically would have gotten completely filled. And so it's a bummer that this is still open because this will act as basically a magnet, whether it gets filled in the coming few days or few weeks, or maybe this is a place that we fill a CME gap that gets filled in the bear market, if that comes. And we'll talk about those situations in the future. But this is one thing that is concerning me. And if you look on the right of my screen, if you can see part of my watch list here is kind of a sea of red. Another thing that concerns me about where Bitcoin can go first, and one of the reasons why we're seeing a flush in all sorts of markets, from futures liquidations to the Bitcoin Treasury companies, and as we can see, other coins like XRP, ETH, and these other cryptos that have gotten a little too frothy. We've also seen Treasury companies have a pretty stark correction. If you look at MetaPlanet, one of the darlings, one that, by the way, I do not own any Treasury companies as it stands. I have owned MetaPlanet in the past, but you can see that we peaked up by $15. I guess 16. Yeah, exactly $16 for the OTC MTPLF ticker, and basically it's been doing a rounding top. This does not look like a great chart. However, the MNAV is coming down rather quickly. You're seeing very similar patterns in other Treasury companies. Smarter Web Company peaked at 630. Now it's down at 215. That's about a 60 to 70% correction. Cantor Equity Partners, this is Jack Muller's 21. They peaked at almost 60, and now they're at under 30. Nakamoto, all these charts have very similar patterns. Semler is kind of its own beast. You've even seen the preferred stocks from Strategy also correct, with Strike, Strife, and Stride sharing very similar patterns, while Stride is basically back to its IPO price. Now, you do have Stretch entering the market, which is probably the type of instrument that a lot of investors in these different products were looking for. So maybe they're just rotating into that. Strategy actually has been relatively strong, although their MNAV is still at about 1.7, 1.8, and this is a fully diluted number. My position is that this MNAV will compress over time with various spurts of increasing. The gravity is definitely towards 1, as much as people do not like that I've said that, and I've been a huge strategy investor. This channel used to be MSTR Daily, as many of you know. I do think the gravity moving forward is that the MNAV will just kind of grind lower over time. That doesn't mean it's shooting to 0 tomorrow, but I don't think it has a lot of staying power over 2 either. Now, it is important to mention, when it comes to the strength of the Bitcoin price, I actually want this number as high as possible. I want all of these companies to do very, very well. Most of them issue equity. Some of them issue various versions of debt, and in Strategy's case, preferred equity. When these companies are strong and overheated, they end up buying a lot of Bitcoin, and that helps propel the price higher. Now, all of that being said, the Bitcoin price is still near an all-time high within the last 10 days, and is hanging in very, very strongly, and that has to do with a lot of the Bitcoin ETF inflows. So those are my two concerns. If I had cash to invest, I'll probably set limit orders for somewhere in the CME gap. I think there's a decent probability that it does get filled. The downside is that we're entering the weekend as I'm posting this video on a Friday. CME futures will be closed for the next 48 hours until we get the open on Sunday night. Maybe it gets filled on Sunday night, or maybe again, this doesn't get filled until the coming bear market. However, a gap like this, I do think will get filled eventually. Most of them do. Statistically, there's pretty high odds, but it will be interesting to see. Otherwise, Bitcoin looks incredibly strong. It does want to go lower momentarily before it can then move up to higher highs. If I do pull up the daily chart from the low in April and turn off the log chart, if I draw a very basic bull flag here, and we're going to do it from the low to really handicap this prediction, but we basically extend this flag. This is what we're seeing right now at about 117K is consolidation before continuation to fully complete this bull flag move, which would put us at a conservative level of about $136,000. There are other better ways to draw this, but I do think that our current situation, once we fill this gap, now that we've kind of filled even lower into the 114,000 area, I do think that there will be juice and some momentum to continue this move up into the 130s. And that's all I have for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Check out the Strategic UTXO newsletter, and I will see you in the next video.